2 weeks ago, Judge Thompson sat at his usual desk at Manchester County Court, looking through the day's cases. He had been a judge for 27 years now. His black robe hung neatly on the coat rack behind him. The morning light came through the big windows, making the wooden furniture glow. Another Tuesday, he thought to himself as he adjusted his reading glasses. The courtroom was filling up with people. Some were lawyers in their suits. Others were people with worried faces waiting to hear about their cases. Judge Thompson liked to keep things moving quickly. He had his routine, and he liked to stick to it. At exactly 9 o'clock, the court clerk called the first case, then the second. By 10 o'clock, Judge Thompson was ready for his morning tea break. But there were still more cases to hear. He looked at his watch, thinking about his appointment at the tennis club later that afternoon. "Next case," he said, not really paying attention as he flipped through the papers on his desk. The clerk called out, "Mrs. Margaret Johnson, charged with obstruction of a public pathway and disturbing the peace." Judge Thompson looked up briefly. A woman walked slowly to the front of the courtroom. She was older, maybe in her 70s. She wore a neat blue dress and sensible shoes. Her gray hair was pulled back under a small hat. She moved carefully but with a straight back, like someone who had faced difficult times before. "State your name for the court, please," the judge said in his usual tone. "Margaret Elizabeth Johnson," she said clearly. Her voice was soft but strong. The judge didn't really look at her face. He was already reading the police report. "You were protesting outside the new Central Shopping Center yesterday. The officers say you refused to move when they asked you to leave. Is this correct?" "I was exercising my right to peaceful protest, Your Honor," Mrs. Johnson replied. Judge Thompson sighed. He had heard this before. People always thought they had the right to stand wherever they wanted, but the law was clear. Public pathways had to stay clear. "Mrs. Johnson, whether you think you have the right or not doesn't matter. The law says you cannot block public pathways. Did you or did you not refuse to move when the officers told you to?" "I did refuse, Your Honor, but if I might explain why." "That's not necessary. The facts are clear." Judge Thompson was getting impatient. His stomach was starting to grumble, and he was thinking about his lunch plans. "I'm finding you guilty as charged. The fine is £100, plus court costs of £25. You have 30 days to pay." Mrs. Johnson stood still for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Thank you, Your Honor. May I say one thing? The case is closed, Mrs. Johnson. Please move aside so we can continue with the next case." As she turned to leave, Judge Thompson was already looking at the next file. He didn't see the sadness in her eyes. He didn't notice how other people in the courtroom looked at her with respect. He just made a note about the fine and moved on. The rest of the morning passed quickly. By noon, Judge Thompson was in his chambers eating his lunch and reading the sports section of the newspaper. He was looking forward to his tennis match. The weather was perfect for it. His secretary knocked on the door. "Judge Thompson, your daughter Emma called. She's coming for dinner tonight as planned." Good," he said, not looking up from his paper. Emma was his only child, and she usually visited on Tuesdays. She taught history at the local school. She was always talking about her students and her lessons. As the afternoon cases continued, Judge Thompson kept looking at his watch. By 3 o'clock, he was ready to finish for the day. He had dealt with parking tickets, minor theft cases, and noise complaints. Nothing exciting, nothing that made him think twice. When the last case was called, he quickly made his decision and wrapped up. 10 minutes later, he was in his car driving to the tennis club. The streets were busy with afternoon traffic. People were shopping, walking their dogs, or just enjoying the sunny day. As he drove past the Central Shopping Center, he noticed a small group of people with signs. They were the same protesters from that morning's case. But he didn't think about it. His mind was on his tennis match and his dinner plans with Emma. The end that evening, Emma Thompson arrived at her father's house right on time at 6 o'clock. She carried a bag of fresh vegetables from the market and wore her favorite blue jumper. She was 35 years old and had been teaching history at Manchester High School for 10 years. Her brown hair was tied back in a ponytail, and she smiled as she let herself in with her key. "Dad, "I'm here," she called out. "In the kitchen," her father replied. He was setting the table with 2 placemats. The kitchen smelled of roast chicken, which was cooking in the oven. Emma put down her bag and gave her father a quick hug. "How was court today?" "Same as usual," Judge Thompson said, reaching for the plates. "Just the typical cases, nothing special." They sat down to eat. Emma had made a salad to go with the chicken. As they ate, she talked about her day at school. "You wouldn't believe how excited my students get when we start the civil rights module. It's my favorite part of the year to teach." "Oh, really?" her father said, cutting his chicken. He was only half listening. His mind was still on the tennis match he had played that afternoon. He had won, which put him in a good mood. "Yes," Emma continued. "Tomorrow I'm introducing them to our local heroes. Did you know Margaret Johnson still lives here in Manchester?" Judge Thompson looked up from his plate. That name sounded familiar. Where had he heard it before? "Margaret Johnson. She's incredible," Emma went on, her eyes lighting up. "When she was just 16, she led the campaign to integrate the public library. Can you imagine being that brave at 16? Something clicked in the judge's mind. Wasn't there a Margaret Johnson in court today? No, it couldn't be the same person. "What did she do exactly?" he asked, now paying more attention. "Oh, Dad, she did so much. She organized the first peaceful protests in Manchester in the 1960s. She was arrested 6 times for standing up for equality. She helped end segregation in restaurants and shops. She even met with Parliament members to change laws." The judge put down his fork. The woman in court today, she had been older, in her 70s. The timing would be right, but surely it couldn't. Does she still live around here?" he asked carefully. "Yes, she lives on Oak Street, not far from the school. She still speaks at community events. Actually, yesterday she was protesting against the new shopping center development. She's defending the small business owners who are being forced out." Judge Thompson's stomach suddenly felt heavy. Oak Street, that's where the protest had been. And the woman in court this morning, Margaret Johnson. It had to be the same person. The shopping center protest. What was it about exactly? He asked, trying to keep his voice normal. Emma sighed. "It's so unfair, Dad. These shop owners have been there for generations. The Johnson family has run their butcher shop for 50 years. The Patel's corner shop is where I bought sweets when I was little. But the new shopping center is pushing them out. Their rents are going up by 300%. Many will have to close." "And Mrs. Johnson was protesting this?" "Of course. She always stands up for people. She knows what it's like to fight for justice. She told my students last month that the fight for fairness never ends. She said every generation has to keep working to make things better." The judge felt sick. He had fined this woman, this hero, without even looking at her properly, without listening to what she had to say. He had dismissed her like she was nobody. Did I ever tell you about my caseload at court?" he asked weakly. "No. You never really talk about work," Emma said. "But that's okay. I know you can't discuss details." Judge Thompson pushed the food around on his plate. He wasn't hungry anymore. The woman he had dismissed so quickly that morning wasn't just anyone. She was someone who had changed their community. Someone who had fought for justice when he was just a child. "Tell me more about Margaret Johnson," he said quietly. Emma smiled, happy to see her father interested in her teaching. For the next hour, she told him stories about Margaret Johnson's life. How she had grown up in poverty but never let that stop her. How she had faced threats and danger but kept fighting. How she had helped change laws and hearts. With each story, Judge Thompson felt worse. He had treated this remarkable woman with indifference. He had fined her without listening. He had judged her without understanding. After Emma left that night, Judge Thompson sat alone in his study. He stared at the photo on his desk, his graduation from law school 30 years ago. He looked so young and idealistic then. When had he stopped seeing people? When had he started just going through the motions? He thought about tomorrow. More cases, more people coming before his bench. Would he look at them and really see them? Or would he just keep moving through his routine, missing the important parts of their stories. The house was quiet now. Outside, a dog barked in the distance. Judge Thompson turned off his desk lamp but remained sitting in the dark, thinking about the woman he had dismissed that morning and wondering how many other stories he had missed in his 27 years on the bench. The end, Judge Thompson lay awake all night. He tossed and turned in his bed, thinking about Margaret Johnson. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in his courtroom, her back straight, her voice steady, and himself, barely looking up from his papers, rushing through her case, like it didn't matter. At 6 in the morning, he got up and made strong coffee. His hand shook slightly as he opened his computer and searched for Margaret Johnson, Manchester Civil Rights. Page after page of results filled the screen. The first photo made him stop breathing for a moment. A young woman with fierce determination in her eyes, holding a sign that read, "Equal Rights for All." It was definitely her, the same strong features, the same direct gaze. He clicked on the first article, Local Teen Leads Library Integration Movement. The article was from 1965. Margaret Johnson, aged 16, had organized peaceful protests when the public library refused to serve Black customers. For 3 months, she led daily demonstrations. Police arrested her 5 times, but she never gave up. Finally, the library board voted to end segregation. Judge Thompson clicked on another link. Johnson meets Prime Minister. This was from 1971. Margaret had been invited to London to discuss fair housing laws. The photo showed her shaking hands with government officials. She looked confident and professional, despite being only 22 years old. He found more articles. One described how she had helped integrate the first restaurant in Manchester. Another told about her work with the elderly community. A local newspaper had written about her teaching young people about their rights. By mid-morning, he had read dozens of stories. Each one painted a picture of a woman who had spent her life fighting for others. She had faced hate, violence, and unfair treatment, but she never stopped believing in justice. His phone rang. It was his secretary. "Judge Thompson, are you coming to court today? You have cases starting at 9. "I'm not feeling well," he said. "Cancel my morning session." "But sir, you have that shop theft case, and—" "Cancel them all. I'll be in this afternoon." He hung up before she could ask more questions. Instead of going to court, Judge Thompson drove to Oak Street. He remembered Emma saying that Margaret Johnson still lived there. He needed to see her again, to say something, to make things right somehow. The street was lined with old shops, a butcher shop with Johnson & Sons on the sign, a small bakery with fresh bread in the window, a corner shop run by the Patel family Emma had mentioned. Each business looked worn but well-loved. People walked in and out, chatting with the shop owners like old friends. Outside the butcher shop, he saw her. Margaret Johnson was talking to a group of worried-looking people. They all held papers in their hands, some were crying. Others looked angry. Margaret was listening carefully to each one. Judge Thompson stayed in his car for a while, watching. He saw how people came to her for help, how they seemed to feel better after talking to her, how she took time with each person, no matter how long it took. When the group began to break up, he finally got out of his car. He walked slowly towards her. His mouth felt dry. What could he possibly say to make up for yesterday? "Mrs. Johnson," he called softly. She turned. He expected her to look angry or surprised. Instead, she just nodded, as if she had been expecting him. "Mr. Thompson," she said. Not Judge, just Mr. It made him feel like a regular person, not a powerful figure. I wanted to talk to you about yesterday," he stammered. "Yesterday is gone," she said simply. "What matters is today." He looked at his shoes. "I read about you this morning. Everything you've done. All the people you've helped I didn't know." "Not knowing isn't the worst thing," she said. "The worst thing is not wanting to know." They stood in silence for a moment. A bus passed by. A mother with a pram walked past. Life continued around them. "These shops," he said finally, looking around. They're important to people. Very important, she agreed. The Johnsons, no relation to me, have been here 50 years. Mr. and Mrs. Patel came here from India 30 years ago. They've helped feed this community. They know their customers by name. They give credit when times are hard. They're not just shops. They're the heart of this neighborhood. But the developers are forcing them out? They're raising rents. 3 times what they pay now. None of them can afford it. They'll have to close. A big shopping center doesn't care about people the way these shops do. Judge Thompson thought about his ruling yesterday, how quickly he had dismissed her, how he hadn't even asked why she was protesting. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She looked at him properly then. Really looked at him. We all make mistakes, Mr. Thompson. The question is, what do we do after we realize our mistake? Her words hit him like ice water. What would he do? He had power as a judge. Could he use it to help instead of harm? Just then, Mrs. Johnson, from the butcher shop, called out, Margaret, can you help me with these papers? I can't understand what they mean. Of course, Margaret replied. She turned back to the judge. Good day, Mr. Thompson. He watched her walk away, helping the older woman with kindness in every movement. He knew then that he couldn't just say sorry and walk away. He had to do something. But what? The end Judge Thompson drove back to the courthouse that afternoon, with his mind racing. He had spent 2 hours walking around Oak Street after Margaret Johnson left. He had talked to the shop owners, learning their stories. Mr. Johnson had served 3 generations of families. Mrs. Patel's corner shop was where people came for advice as much as for groceries. These weren't just businesses. They were community, lifelines. When he entered his chambers, his secretary looked surprised. Judge Thompson, are you feeling better? Yes, thank you, he said quickly. Can you bring me all the files related to the Central Shopping Center development? Her eyebrows rose. Judges didn't usually ask for development files, but she knew better than to question him. Within 10 minutes, she placed a thick stack of papers on his desk. For the next 3 hours, Judge Thompson read everything. The developers, plans, the council meeting minutes, the protest reports, property value assessments. As he read, patterns emerged. The developers had connections with several council members. The rent increases weren't just about profit. They were designed to force out existing tenants quickly. He made some phone calls, first to his old law school friend, David, who worked in property law, then to another friend who had contacts at the council. By 5 o'clock, he had a clearer picture of what was happening. The next morning, Judge Thompson arrived early at court. Instead of starting his usual cases, he called his clerk. I need to speak with the court administrator. Is something wrong, Judge? I need to use my powers as a senior judge to call for a community hearing. It's about the Oak Street development dispute. The administrator looked confused. That's highly unusual. We don't usually intervene in property disputes unless there's a specific legal challenge. There is a legal challenge coming, Judge Thompson said firmly. I want to get ahead of it. Can you arrange it for Friday? Within hours, word spread. A judge calling for a community hearing about the shopping center development was big news. Phone calls came in from council members, shop owners, and even the developers' lawyers. Everyone was confused about why a judge would get involved. On Wednesday, Judge Thompson did something he had never done before. He visited the Central Shopping Center site directly. He walked through the existing shops, talking to owners and customers. He examined the proposed development site. He even met with the lead developer, Mr. Stevens. Judge Thompson, Mr. Stevens said, clearly nervous. I'm surprised to see you here. Is there a legal matter I should know about? Just informing myself, the judge replied. I've heard there are concerns about the impact on local businesses. Business is business, Judge. Progress happens. These old shops can't compete with modern retail. Competition is one thing. Deliberately, pricing people out of their livelihoods is another. Mr. Stevens's face reddened. Our company follows all legal requirements. Legal doesn't always mean right, Judge Thompson said quietly. That evening, Judge Thompson had dinner again with Emma. This time he did all the talking. He told her about visiting Oak Street, about meeting the shop owners, about realizing he had been blind to so many stories over the years. "Dad?" Emma said softly. "What changed? Yesterday you were going through the motions. Today you sound different." "I met someone who opened my eyes," he said. "Margaret Johnson, the woman I fined on Monday, your civil rights hero." Emma's mouth dropped open. "You fined Margaret Johnson?" "Oh, Dad." "I know," he said. "I didn't even look at her properly. I just wanted to get through my cases and go play tennis." On Thursday, Judge Thompson researched legal precedents. He found cases where judges had used community impact assessments to influence development decisions. He studied housing laws and tenants' rights. By Friday morning, he felt prepared. The community hearing was packed. Margaret Johnson sat in the front row with the shop owners. The developers team filled 2 tables with lawyers. Local residents crowded the back. News cameras lined the walls. Judge Thompson opened the session. "This is not a trial. This is a community hearing to understand all perspectives on the Central Shopping Center development. Everyone will have a fair chance to speak." For 4 hours he listened. Shop owners testified about their business's history. Residents spoke about losing local services. The developers presented their economic benefits. Margaret Johnson gave a powerful speech about community values versus corporate profits. As the hearing progressed, Judge Thompson asked sharp questions. He challenged the developers' claims about job creation. He questioned whether the economic benefits would actually reach local people. He asked specific questions about the rent increase calculations. By the end, even the developers' lawyers looked uncomfortable. One of them approached Judge Thompson. "Your Honor, my client would like to discuss possible modifications to our plans." "I'm listening," Judge Thompson said. "We might be able to lower the rent increases, perhaps phase them in over time, and guarantee spaces for the existing businesses." It wasn't everything the community wanted, but it was a start. Judge Thompson scheduled follow-up meetings. He made it clear he would monitor the situation closely. As people filed out, Margaret Johnson approached him. "Thank you for listening today, Judge Thompson. That's all any of us want, to be heard." "No," he replied firmly. "Thank you for showing me what justice really looks like. It's not just about following rules. It's about understanding people." Walking back to his chambers that day, Judge Thompson felt different, lighter somehow. For the first time in years, he remembered why he had wanted to become a judge. Not to process cases quickly, but to serve justice fairly, to protect the vulnerable, to make his community better. The end. The following months changed everything for Judge Thompson. He met regularly with the developers and shop owners, making sure both sides kept their promises. The rent increases were reduced from 300% to 30%, with a gradual phase-in over 3 years. Each existing business would have an option to stay in the new development if they wanted. News of Judge Thompson's involvement spread throughout Manchester. People started talking about the judge who had stood up for small businesses. Other communities facing similar problems began asking for his help. He received letters from residents thanking him for finally listening. But the biggest changes happened inside the courtroom itself. Judge Thompson started each day differently now. Instead of rushing through cases, he made sure to look at each person who came before him. He asked questions. He listened to their full stories. His sentences became more thoughtful, more personal. On a cold Tuesday in December, exactly 6 months after first fining Margaret Johnson, Judge Thompson got an unexpected visitor. Margaret walked into his chambers, carrying a small box wrapped in bright paper. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, standing up, "what brings you here?" "I have something for you," she said with a warm smile. "It's the opening day of the new shopping center next week. The developers have already destroyed part of our old street. It looks strange having half the old shops and half the new mall. The community wanted to give you this." He unwrapped the box carefully. Inside was a wooden gavel, beautifully carved with the words, "For justice with wisdom." "The shop owners made it together," Margaret explained. "Mr. Johnson did the carving. Mrs. Patel polished it. Even Mr. Stevens, the developer, contributed to the wood. He's been changing too. Judge Thompson felt his throat tighten. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. You listened when it mattered. You acted when you could have. Walked away. That's what leaders do. After Margaret left, Judge Thompson sat holding the gavel. He thought about how one moment, really seeing and hearing someone, could change everything. How easily he could have missed this lesson if Margaret had been less patient, less understanding. That evening, Emma visited as she did every Tuesday. Over dinner, she told him about her students' latest project. They're interviewing local heroes. For their history assignment, 3 students chose you, Dad. They called you the judge who changed. Judge Thompson nearly dropped his fork. Me? But I only did what was right. That's what makes you special, Emma said. You admitted you were wrong. You learned. You changed. My students see that as heroic. I had a good teacher, he said thoughtfully. Margaret Johnson showed me what courage really looks like. It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to grow. 6 months later, Judge Thompson was asked to speak at the local law school graduation. He stood at the podium, looking at the excited young faces before him. They reminded him of his own graduation day, full of ideals and hope. In my 28 years as a judge, he began, I thought I knew what justice meant. I thought it was about following rules and applying laws evenly. But last year I learned something important. I learned that justice without wisdom is like a clock without hands. It may look right, but it doesn't serve its purpose. He told them about Margaret Johnson, about Oak Street, about the moment he realized he had stopped seeing people as individuals. He shared how one case taught him more than decades of experience had. The greatest lesson I can give you today is this. Never stop learning from those who come before you in court. The person you treat with indifference today might be the one who teaches you the most important lesson of your career tomorrow. After his speech, a young graduate approached him. Sir, I just wanted to say thank you. My grandmother was at your community hearing in Oak Street. She owns the bakery there. You saved her shop. Judge Thompson smiled. No, she saved something more important. She, and people like Margaret Johnson, saved my perspective on justice. Today, Judge Thompson still sits on the Manchester County Court bench, but his courtroom feels different now. Warmer, more human. He brings the carved gavel every day, a reminder that justice must be served with wisdom and compassion. The old shops on Oak Street remain open alongside the new development. They represent something powerful, the possibility of progress without losing community. Customers shop at both, and the street feels more alive than ever. And whenever Judge Thompson needs guidance, he thinks of Margaret Johnson's steady voice saying, we all make mistakes. The question is, what do we do after we realize our mistake? That question changed not just his career, but his life. It reminded him that every person has a story worth hearing, and that true justice comes from understanding those stories with an open heart. In the end, the most important cases aren't always the biggest ones. Sometimes they're the ordinary moments when we choose to truly see each other, when we choose understanding over judgment, when we choose to change. The end.